prosecutors have dropped some charges against Diddy.
So the government has dropped some charges in the Diddy case. Let's talk about it. So after weeks of trial, both the prosecution and defense have rested in the Sean P. Diddy Combs case.
We're outside federal court in Lower Manhattan, where for the last 7 weeks, federal prosecutors have been presenting their case against one of music's biggest stars, the hip-hop mogul Sean Diddy Combs. Today, the prosecution rested. Soon, a jury of 8 men and 4 women will be handed the case after hearing from 34 witnesses and examining more than 1,000 pieces of evidence, including voice notes of Combs played in court.
Where my life is at right now, I don't have no time for no games, baby girl. Me and you could be mad, I could have a spat, we could have whatever, then after that you better get on your job.
Some of the government's key testimony came from 3 alleged victims, 7 former Combs employees, 4 hotel workers, 2 celebrities, and 2 male escorts, one known as the Punisher and Daniel Phillip. Prosecutors say this testimony and hundreds of pieces of evidence paint a picture of a criminal enterprise they say Combs used to coerce, traffic, and transport his alleged victims, with the defense unsuccessfully filing for 2 mistrials and the judge dismissing 1 juror for lack of candor.
So hopefully that caught you up to where we're at today. Now, just for completeness, before the defense rested, the judge asked Diddy if he wanted to testify, and he said, obviously not, I'm not testifying. So the defense essentially is going to go on the fact that they don't believe the prosecution has proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury. Here's a quick word from our sponsor, Babbel. Got any fun trips coming up? There's probably one thing you haven't put on the packing list yet. That's speaking the language. But don't worry, Babbel's got you covered. With Babbel's conversation-based approach, you'll quickly master useful words, phrases that you'll actually use in real life. Choose from over a dozen languages, including Spanish, French, Italian, German, tailored specifically to your proficiency, interests, and schedule. Personally, I'm diving into Spanish, and Babbel's interactive dialogues and speech recognition tools make practicing conversation skills fun and easy. Plus, with personalized review system and Babbel games, your new language skills will stick around long term. Now, studies from Yale and Michigan State confirm Babbel's effectiveness. Just 15 hours on Babbel is equivalent to a full college semester. Now, ready to start your journey? I'm teaming up with Babbel to offer you an exclusive 55% discount only for my listeners. Go to babbel.com/Nate. That's babbel.com/Nate to grab this discount while supplies last. Now, rules and restrictions apply, but go to babbel.com/Nate to grab that 55% discount today. Now, on the screen, you'll see a chart that lists the 8 crimes that the government is alleging that Diddy committed. Now, to convict Diddy under the RICO charges, the government's going to have to show that Diddy committed 2 of these 8 crimes in the past 10 years. And Diddy is also being charged separately for crimes listed in 13F and in 13G. So why am I telling you all this? Well, the government wants to streamline the process of jury instructions. So they are dropping some of their claims against Diddy to make the jury instructions just easier to read and understand. Here's the document from the prosecutors to the judge. So the letters states that the government understands the court's desire to streamline instructions. With that in mind, the government suggests ways to streamline these instructions. Specifically, the government has removed instructions from the charge relating to attempted kidnapping under both California and New York law, 2, attempted arson under California law, and 3, aiding and abetting sex trafficking. Now, you're going to have a lot of people incorrectly saying that the government dropped the kidnapping charge, that the government dropped the arson charge, which is not the case. They dropped part of those charges. And for me to really explain it to you well, we have to go back and look at the actual indictment. Now, in the indictment under section 13, you get to see the RICO charges laid out. So when you scroll down to 13A, you'll see multiple acts involving kidnapping chargeable under provisions of state law. Now, going back to the chart, as you can see where it says indictment 13A, it says kidnapping plus variations. And the RICO predicate category is kidnapping. And those variations are listed in the indictment. They're kidnapping, section 207 of California Penal Code. They're attempted kidnapping. They're also aiding and abetting kidnapping. And there's also the conspiracy to kidnap. Now, going back to the letter that the prosecutors gave to the judge about jury instructions, it says here that they're dropping the attempted kidnapping under both California and New York law. So if we return to the indictment and we remove the attempted kidnapping under California law and New York law, then you still have plain old kidnapping, plain old aiding and abetting of kidnapping, and the conspiracy to kidnap that are still available in the jury instructions. Next, specifically, they talk about attempted arson under California law. So the same thing with arson. They remove the attempt to commit arson, but they still are charging the arson under the California Penal Code, aiding and abetting, and conspiracy to commit arson. And the last charge that they're not pursuing is the aiding and abetting of sex trafficking. And even with that, they're removing the aiding and abetting aspect of the sex trafficking, but they're just doing that to streamline the instructions. Now, also in the letter to the judge, they make it very clear they're still pursuing sex trafficking charges, as I said before, but they want to make some things clear to the jury. The first thing is they want the judge to put in the jury instructions that prior consensual sex activity is not determinative of whether a victim is sex trafficked. Meaning, if you had consensual sex with the person previously and then they sex trafficked you later, then that has no role in determining whether the victim was sex trafficked later. You see this type of language occur a lot in cases in which a man sexually assaults his wife. And this will be the instruction they give, is that just because they are married and had consensual sex during their marriage doesn't mean that the husband couldn't assault his wife. Now, also, when it comes to sex trafficking, another thing the government wants the judge to tell the jury is that just because you got paid doesn't mean you were trafficked. As it says here, one of the defendants in the case, whose name is Jane, had a multi-year love contract under which the defendant agreed to pay Jane rent in the amount of $10,000 per month. And they want the court to say that payment alone does not preclude a finding of guilt on sex trafficking. And they have a cite to a case that affirms that decision. Now, obviously, this is a huge problem for the prosecution because if Jane was in a contract to be sex trafficked, then it's going to be very, very hard to say she was forced or coerced, right? She signed on the dotted line and accepted payment. But that's what the government's trying to throw out. They also want the judge to tell the jury that physical restraint is a requirement. And during cross-examination, they say the defense counsel extensively questioned Jane about times she could have escaped. But as the letter says here, physical restraint is not required to establish sex trafficking or forced labor. Essentially, even if she could leave but didn't leave, that is not dispositive for sex trafficking. Now, the next thing the government wants is they would like the court to add a single sentence to its charge on sex trafficking to clarify that the defendant need not be the person who receives the thing of value from a sex act. Now, this is for the jurors to understand that in most sex trafficking cases, you have a pimp, they bring prostitutes, and they get paid some money for the prostitute sleeping with some other guy or something like that. But in this case, P. Diddy was paying for prostitutes to sleep with someone else. He wasn't actually getting any financial benefit from it, but his benefit was kind of sexualized. So they're saying that, hey, there's no requirement for you to actually receive cash money or actually be involved in the sex act to actually be charged under the sex trafficking statute. And the government wants to make it very clear that when it comes to sex trafficking, the commercial sex act need not occur. What does that mean? As it says here, the government respectfully requests that the court add a very short instruction reflecting the black letter law proposition that a completed commercial sex act is not required for sex trafficking conviction. Now, what that means is that you've taken a person to the place to have the commercial sex, and for some reason she doesn't or he doesn't have commercial sex. Well, they're saying, well, that's not a requirement for sex trafficking. The trafficking occurs when the defendant attempts to coerce, force, or trick the person into having commercial sex. They don't actually have to have it. They just have to have the attempt to force that person into commercial sex. And they give an example from the trial. A juror could reasonably find that even though a commercial sex act did not occur immediately after the defendant attempted to drag Miss Ventura back to the room. This is the hotel incident when Combs had beat Cassie and dragged her back into the room because she didn't want to perform in a commercial sex act. Well, they're saying that is sex trafficking. So just to be clear, this headline, prosecutors dropped some charges in the Diddy case, which is the same title of this video, is false. But this headline from TMZ is more accurate, where it says Diddy prosecutors want to dumb down elements of RICO charge, simplifying for the jurors' sake. That's what's actually going on. Now, prediction. I don't know if Diddy is going to be convicted on everything. Now, there are some charges where I think Diddy is for sure going to get convicted. The prostitution transportation, which is 13G, he's being charged for that separately. I think he's done. I think you've had so many prostitutes and people say they've been paid to cross state lines for the purpose of prostitution. He's caught dead to rights, and that is a RICO predicate. So I think the government gets a 2-for-1 there. You get to help get to your RICO piece of it, and you have the prostitution. Now, you can get up to like 10 years in prison for that, but I think they got him cold on that one. I also think they got him cold for drug distribution. Now, that's specifically just for RICO. So drug distribution and the prostitution, if you have those two alone, then that gives you enough to then go into RICO. So I think those two get you RICO, and those two are very, very clear. When it comes to something like the sex trafficking or the forced labor, I think you have some issues here. I think you have issues with Jane, for instance, saying that, hey, she was paid $10,000 a month for these love fest or whatever. Well, that's going to be hard to prove that she's being sex trafficked. And Cassie was claiming that she liked to do some of this stuff. You know, she wasn't forced or coerced. So I think you may have issues with the sex trafficking piece. But understand, for RICO, you can get RICO alone because you only need 2 of these 8. You just have to convince a jury that Diddy has done 2 of these 8 to get the conviction on RICO. Now, for the other charges like the bribery, we've got evidence of that, right? You got all these people saying, hey, they were bribed, they were paid, how much they were paid, when they were paid, they signed the NDAs. So you got that. Witness tampering, that goes with the bribery. The kidnapping, obstruction, and the arson. I'm not too sure about those 2. But again, you really don't need them because you're really just looking for 2 out of the 8. So as of right now, my prediction is Diddy may get off on the sex trafficking charge. But I think RICO is pretty much a done deal, and I think the prostitution transportation is pretty much a done deal. So I'm saying Diddy will be convicted of some of these charges, but may not be convicted of all. And I'm predicting maybe 10 years in prison if he's convicted of these crimes. Now, jurors are wild cards, so who knows? But we will see, and we'll get to see if my prediction is right. I do see guilty verdicts on things like prostitution transportation. I just don't see how you don't have it. It's all there. And the bribery, unless you don't, who do you believe? The witnesses, or do you believe Diddy? That's a he said, she said. And Diddy's not really saying anything. He didn't give a narrative. It's just kind of like, the jury decides. So, but let me know how you feel in the comment section. Let me know if you think Diddy's going to get convicted or if you think he's going to get off on everything. And let me know how you feel about the prosecution trying to make the charges easier for the jury to understand. With that being said, my name is Nate the Lawyer. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.